The story begins with a young man having a strange dream that has been haunting him lately. A girl from a cellar hits herself in the chest with her fists so hard that blood appears on her chest. It was surprising that women rarely became part of the royal family of Jogjakarta. This had only happened once before. The girl was wearing clothes that showed she was not afraid to die. The girl noticed the young man looking at her chest, which the stranger was beating. He asked her how she could constantly feel hatred and anger towards everyone around her. The stranger replied that she had always considered herself to be right, no matter what. Under no circumstances did she think that she had done anything wrong or bad, or that she had made a mistake. But the truth suddenly dawned on her, and now it was time to pay for her past deeds. It was difficult for the stranger to realize what terrible things had happened and what atrocities she had been involved in the past. The young man said he didn't quite understand what she was talking about. The girl kissed him on the forehead and replied that it was too early to talk about it. After all, everything has its time, and everything has its place under the sun. The boy woke up in the middle of the night after seeing this strange dream. He couldn't calm down once he saw it. The vision seemed to eat away at his soul and wouldn't let him distract himself until morning. In a prison carefully and thoroughly guarded by soldiers, one of the prisoners tries to get the attention of the warden. The warden pretends not to notice. The prisoner asks if he should tear everyone apart. The prisoner who dared to address the warden in such a tone was a girl. Her name was Adrian Dew, and she was the second daughter of the once illustrious Dew family. Now this noble lady was asking to have her head scratched. The soldier had no choice but to refer to the law prohibiting touching or contacting prisoners. Besides, the girl hadn't bathed in over 2 weeks. But the girl wouldn't let up. She called for Nihola. He was a man who had been put in chains and had wooden blocks around his neck. He was just as dirty and unkempt, which made the guard say that he was a good match for his former commander. Adrian replied that there was nothing to be afraid of. They looked so bad because they had recently returned from the southern lands, where savages hid in the desert, where there was not a hint of shade. The rocks in those places were burnt to a pure white color, and enemies awaited them at every turn. Nevertheless, she and her warriors managed to survive in those places and return with a glorious victory over their fierce enemy. The sun burned their hair and skin during the day. The next day, a new horde of savages, thirsty for blood and scalps, arrived at their military camp to challenge them and avenge their fallen brothers. So Adrian was sure that few of the prison guards could have endured such horrific conditions. So at the very least, out of gratitude for their sacrifice on the battlefield, the guard should scratch her head, right now. The man asked what would happen if he did so with the tip of his spear. She replied that he had probably been sent by the first princess, who had paid good money for the murder. The guard denied his guilt. A boy approached the barred door. He was the eldest child of the Dew family. His name was Kaylee. He assured her that his friend had not changed at all since their previous meeting and remained as temperamental as ever. The brother approached Adrian, drew his sword and held it to his sister's throat. He asked if she was ready to say goodbye to life. Brenka smiled and asked what he would do to her with that toothpick. Adrian added that if he accidentally dropped the sword on her leg, he would get rid of her faster than she would get rid of his head. He asked how a slave who now commanded slaves dared to speak to him like that. The commander defended her people. She advised her brother to watch his other leg before he broke that one too. For Kaylee, it was a treacherous blow. After all, this injury would remain with him for the rest of his life. The young man decided not to punish his sister, but the girl had already gone on the offensive. She asked how Kaylee would behave when Prince Ethan intervened in the situation. She wouldn't even have to leave. The girl laughed. She said that it was one thing to hide her in prison so she wouldn't interfere with his plans, but it was quite another to cripple his confidant, the prince's right-hand man, whom he relied on. The boy was angry. He had always been bothered by the condescension with which she spoke about his attitude toward military affairs, which, according to the law, he was supposed to be involved in as a descendant of the Dew family, commander of the guard. Adrian said that she herself was ready to maim him so as not to provoke any aggression from her brother. People knew a lot about her. Songs were sung throughout the country praising her power and genius. However, she had another nickname. Behind her back, many called her the prince's mad dog. For all members of the Dew family, this nickname was highly undesirable and shocking. Even more shocking was the collapse of the Jew family. As a result, brother and sister, Cale and Adrian, chose sides between two opposing rulers who were bitter enemies and hated each other with a fierce rage, destroying their own troops. The head of the family, Barbate Jew, eventually grew tired of trying to reconcile them. So he abandoned the cause, for the country that possessed the reserves of black water that fueled the fire had more serious problems. The first princess, Della, received the patronage and protection of the temple of Afelara, whose followers' courage pierced the heavens. The princess destroyed her enemies in the north and strengthened her position. After that, Keely Jew took the side of the second princess. Her sister took the side of Prince Ethan, who, although sick and in poor health, was able to turn the situation to his advantage by using his wits. At the age of 15, the prince invented a new use for black water, which ignites fire. It was related to military affairs. Many were delighted with the powerful military genius of the young ruler. However, when a reception was held in honor of the prince's 21st birthday and coming of age, his sister ridiculed him. She declared in front of the guests that the inventor would never be a good king. There were even rumors that she herself would become a great ruler under the protection of the temple. But the situation changed dramatically after Adriana Jew became the second prince's knight and led his army. After winning a bunch of battles under the second prince's banner and bringing the head of his enemy, King Brish, to the feet of the then king of Acela, she kept bringing happiness and talent to her rulers. But as brave as she was just as trusting. After all, after her loyal service, she was called the second prince's mad dog. But she became most famous when she punished the princess's supporters. This happened right in front of the king's palace and meant complete contempt for the first princess. No one was going to forgive this girl, fearing her desire for tyranny and power. And Adiran decided to punish her. The princess and her brother Adrian decided to send her to a military garrison in the snow-white rocky plains. There would be fierce battles with the enemies of the kingdom, savages. But despite all expectations, the girl won. However, betrayal awaited her where Adrian least expected it. At the ceremonial entrance to the city, instead of flowers, ropes flew from the crowd toward the girl, intended to tie her and the horse on which the commander was riding. Prince Ethan was walking with his assistant. They were discussing how the princess had dared to imprison a distinguished person who had been loyal to His Majesty the King all this time. Or rather, it was Keely Jew who had done it. Rumors of their enmity had been circulating for a long time. It intensified even more after each member of the family began to win over aristocrats and nobles to their side. Their chances were equal in this matter. The girl was brought to the royal hall, where many distinguished guests had gathered. King Estella greeted Adrian and called her a girl knight, but by no means a traitor, as everyone had expected. Many believed that His Majesty would restrict her rights or even order the Jew family to wash away their shame with blood. But the king asked the girl herself if she was aware of her guilt. Adrian replied that her guilt lay in using slaves as warriors and promising to set them free immediately after their victory over the savage tribes. By doing so, the girl had challenged the caste system. The nobles and aristocrats became very active on this issue, as they could never have imagined that the Ilak tribes would become their equals within the same state. Some tried to defend the warrior. One of the king's closest advisors said that the girl was actually a hero, and that she had won a significant victory for the state under extraordinary circumstances. She had been given fewer soldiers than she needed. The king denied her merits. In his opinion, Adrian had violated the statutes of the temple and attempted to usurp the prerogative of awarding titles within the kingdom, as well as reforming its structure. According to a centuries-old agreement, the Ilaks could under no circumstances be equal to the citizens of the state. Those who believed and acted contrary to this were considered traitors and attempted to overthrow the legitimate government. However, the king himself had no idea what to do with the girl. After all, she had previously proven herself to be an outstanding and talented commander who had brought the state a series of victories over fierce enemies. The princess said that the accused's father had held the position of chancellor, so it would be unwise to punish the daughter of such a person. And the savages had not yet been brought to complete submission and control. So it was worth thinking about. Another assistant reported that in such troubled times, the kingdom needed her, so sending such a warrior to the scaffold would be a mistake. It was worth considering how to make the most of her. One option was to dress the woman in the clothes of an ordinary knight so that she could go through the entire military journey from the very beginning. This way, she would be able to raise the morale of her comrades in arms. Another way to atone for her crime would be to send the girl in search of the great criminal of the entire state, Martha. He disappeared 10 years ago along with a sacred relic, and no one has heard from him since. The final proposal was to send her to tropical Jokart, whose climate and weather conditions frightened many officials and courtiers and forced them to refuse the position. The head of the order emphasized that Adrian's transfer to a military unit would boost the morale of the soldiers, but the girl's independent spirit would lead to a decline in discipline. Finally, after much deliberation, the king appointed the girl as regent in Jakarta. Adrian would have preferred to become a warrior in some military unit in the desert, where savage customs and orders still prevailed. Many believed that such a girl should not be set free. Some of the nobles understood perfectly well how many problems such a decision would cause His Majesty the King, but did not dare to argue. The kingdom of Acela had been striving for independence for centuries. It was a powerful enemy and a loyal ally, and over time, the surrounding lands became its colonies and vassals' subjects. The dogma of the Heavenly King became the official ideology of all subordinate and dependent lands, but many dared to whisper that it had been created specifically to support the king's power. However, the kingdom felt dependent on one of its vassals in a certain way. It was Jakarta, for it was there that the much-desired black water could be found, which could ignite fire and flames. Among the numerous clans that inhabited those lands, one stood out above all others. It was the clan of the former rulers of those lands. They were distinguished by their large white wings, which set them apart from ordinary people. The kingdom's authorities tried with all their might to destroy them. From the very beginning of his reign, the current king tried to completely destroy the descendants of the royal family of Jakarta, but his efforts were in vain. It was to these lands that King Adrian sent her. She was to help his protégé, Celeste Lu, conquer Jakarta once and for all and rule on behalf of the king, administering justice and fairness there. At the same time, she had to spend 5 years there as an aide and train military personnel for the new order, which would completely destroy the rebellious spirit of Jakarta and its people. Celeste Lu was the son of the king and a princess he had captured. When the boy grew up, the king recognized him as his bastard and sent him to the rebellious colony to restore order there, appointing him regent. Now, the girl from the Jew family was to become the regent's deputy, which humiliated her in the eyes of others. What made her feel even more uncomfortable was that she had once recruited soldiers from this region and enjoyed their trust. Adrian's powers were very limited this time. However, she had every right to use her position in society. But the climate and weather of the region could significantly affect her health. The count tried to protect the poor girl. He demanded that the king specify the conditions under which the girl would receive full indulgence and forgiveness for her sins. The ruler thought about it. The girl knew that he did not like such things. Her father remained silent. He did not dare to stand up for his daughter because, over the years of serving the king, he had learned his habits and understood perfectly well when it was not worth going against the will of the ruler. Suddenly, the king's voice broke the silence. He announced that he would grant his subject forgiveness if she found the mythical Golden City in Jakarta, which could be a source of incredible wealth for Estella. Everyone around began to whisper. They believed that this was simply impossible, and finding the city meant going against all the myths about the chief god. So in any case, the girl would once again find herself in danger. But the king was serious. He promised that in this case, Adrian would receive the position of commander not only of the military, but also of the supreme magistrate of all the orders of knights in the lands of Estella. The girl was given the opportunity to choose one soldier from among those who had previously been under her command. Adrian took advantage of this and chose a man from the Ilak tribes with whom she had been imprisoned. The warrior girl acted wisely. She chose her companion based on the fact that all men from Estella were simply hated in Jokart, and forcing them to bow down to the supreme god was not conducive to peace. Ethan tried to stand up for his ally. After all, Going to those wild lands meant a threat to life. Many travelers had suffered there. Their legs and arms were cut off, and they were thrown helplessly outside the borders of the state. The slave Adrian was also going to be branded. The king ordered that a mark be put on the slave's tongue, so that he would always remember his sin before the ruler and his attempt to restore harmony and peace. The soldiers grabbed the poor man and dragged him to the dungeons. The girl tried to intervene, but her efforts were in vain. She could not save her faithful companion Neil from being branded. He understood this. Ethan asked the guards for time to be alone with Adrian. He was accompanied by the Count, who apologized for his unworthy behavior up to that point and for failing to protect the girl. Finally, the prince himself approached. He asked her to be careful and hold on. He also added that he promised to make every effort to reduce the length of her stay in Jokart. Adrian said she would stand up for herself. The young man shook the girl's hand. He said he remembered the moment when he first saw her in the garden, where she was roasting meat. But now times had changed, and nothing remained of the past. Adrian was pleased. The prince returned to their old conversation about becoming his life partner. But she had a nasty look on her face again. The prince joked that no lady would react that way. The girl wondered what would happen if she accepted the offer now. He replied that the situation would be complicated because Adrian would become a princess who would be considered a sinner and a victim. The warrior girl asked what nickname she would be given. After all, 10 years had passed since girls and women had been allowed to become knights, and she was still often called a courtesan with a sword at the prince's side. Adrian replied that she would only refuse if it meant casting a shadow on the prince himself. After all, there were much stronger words that the women and girls around her used to express their dissatisfaction. Ethan, in turn, replied that he was willing to do almost anything to give his loyal follower the opportunity to remain free. Marrying her was also part of his plans. The girl was very pleased that someone cared so much about her, and she was faced with a dilemma. On the one hand, she could agree and save herself, but put Ethan's future at risk. So, to everyone's surprise, Adrian replied that she was ready to consider the proposal, not as a prince, but as a king. And then Ethan could tell her, as king. He asked if she would really agree in that case. The guards took the girl away and led her to the exit. The confused prince did not know what to do to save the poor girl from her terrible fate, but she was clearly unable to do so herself. In the evening, the princess listened to a report about what Adrian had discussed with the prince. The young man reported on the proposal and the girl's response. The princess noted that it was a rather courageous act. The girl added that her brother never did anything just for the sake of it. All his actions had a reason, aimed at obtaining the maximum benefit. Perhaps he did not want to lose such a powerful military leader. After all, the king was trying to strengthen his position in every way possible. To this end, he appointed a new governor of the newly conquered lands in the Snow-White Cliffs to control the local savages. There should have been no problems with the candidate for the post of governor of the Snow-White Cliffs. They would simply send him a suitable and well-trained doctor to sort things out. But there was a problem with the would-be hired assassins who were to go to Jakarta. It had to be solved as quickly as possible, because Adrian could not be left in that place to gain strength. The princess spoke with the brother of the punished man and informed him that if Adrian refused to serve the princess, he should simply be destroyed. Anything that did not belong to the girl had to be destroyed irrevocably. Kaylee said that his broken leg greatly hindered him from fulfilling his role as a knight at the princess's court, to which the king's daughter assured him that he was already doing a good job as the ruler's right-hand man. The boy bowed and thanked her for her praise. It was a good sign for him. The girl continued to talk about her plan to destroy Adrian. In Jakarta, the death of a knight's girlfriend would be natural. According to Princess Estella, it would be enough to simply walk through the streets of the city to be killed by the local population. A mute and crippled servant would not be a reliable protection for Adrian in those conditions. Kelly found her mistress's curiosity and concern for Jakarta very strange. She replied that from the very beginning, Adrian Dew had been intended for a completely different task, but everything had changed. The position of regent was too high for a knight, and the prince who had deposed Princess Jakarta was also unmarried. Therefore, a political marriage had to be arranged to prevent war. If Adrian agreed to go to Jakarta as a bride, she would have saved her life, and could have become a very wealthy and important person. Now, she would be nothing more than an unmarried corpse in the desert. At night, Nihil and Adiran were getting ready to leave. They had already saddled their horses when the girl felt sorry for her servant, who had become even more withdrawn after his punishment and would not speak to her. The girl's father entered the stable. She did not expect to see him there, and therefore hoped that he would bring bad news. Old Jew asked her to stop supporting the disgraced prince and to ask the king for mercy. The girl did not consider herself defeated, but she also did not want to become a pawn in political games to save herself from the king. Her father knew his daughter's character, but now it bordered on madness and stupidity. Adrian replied that stubbornness on the battlefield was often a sign of success and future victory. Even when the soldiers were confused among the snow-white rocks, she took control. Her father gave the girl the sacred sword of the Jew family. The man said that his son still did not know how to use it properly, but he was sure that his daughter would use it to defend justice and the law. The girl looked at the weapon in surprise. She read the inscription on the blade, which said that the last one standing would be the winner. Adrian asked her father if he regretted the path he had chosen for her. His daughter thanked him for giving her shelter and always taking her side, even though it often angered the king. The girl replied that she could not accept the sword from her father, as it was too great an honor. The man replied that Prince Ethan would not come to rescue her. Adrian believed her father, for he had lived a long life and was skilled at political games, knowing how to navigate such matters. Princess Della would not leave her father alone. She wanted revenge for his bold move and for appointing his daughter as regent, which would allow her not only to survive, but also to become powerful. Her father told her that he had once led the army that went to conquer Jakarta. Once, he had a vision of a strange golden city, so he told her where to go. Her father had once been a fool who believed in ideals and the beauty of everything around him. However, the girl did not want to believe that she would need her father's advice, but the man was certain otherwise. He simply wished her luck. It hurt him deeply to let his daughter go so easily. For some reason, he remembered the moment when he began teaching her to ride a horse and use weapons. At the time, it seemed silly and wrong. Adrian herself was also thinking about her father. She was hurt, but her pride prevented her from simply bursting into tears and returning to say goodbye properly to the man who had protected her all her life. A month and a half later, they were already in Jokart. The girl cursed her older brother for not emphasizing her death penalty in order to get rid of her. The local climate seemed to be slowly killing her. Her only desire now was not for a sip of water, but to get rid of her brother, to strangle him and kill him. On top of everything else, she had a leg injury that caused her a lot of pain and discomfort. The journey was unbearable. Being a criminal, she did not want to travel in a cart with everyone staring at her. The girl chose to ride on horseback, which allowed her to take full advantage of the speed and maneuverability. They often stopped along the way so she could rest. Nihil took care of her and helped her everywhere. Without him, this trip would have been a disaster. The servant skillfully treated her leg and healed it. The girl emphasized that he was not her slave and could now leave her freely instead of carrying her leg. What annoyed her most was that she could not be treated before being sent to Jakarta, as the soldiers had been. This was because Adrian had once called her brother a cripple. Everyone around heard about it, and rumors began to spread that she had mocked him in front of the servants and soldiers. The girl treated her companion well. She simply could not call Nihil anything else. His loyalty impressed her, and Adrian told him that from now on they could talk to each other as equals. The man became less talkative after the soldiers had mocked him. He didn't ask any unnecessary questions, but he was afraid to show the girl his disability. He had been enslaved since childhood, and Nihil was not accustomed to kindness. His former boss promised to tell him about their exile and the goal they would pursue. They spoke of a magical golden city where black water was born and which would make anyone rich. Since ancient times, many countries had tried to control the lands that had black water and gold as resources. The influence of states depended directly on this. But after Estella's conquest, the competitors disappeared. But Estella's rulers also feared that the city would be found. Legend said that the first person to find the city of gold had wings. This directly undermined the cult of the supreme god, and that was the reason for their exile. After all, the viral family ruled Jakarta. Their main feature was the presence of wings on their backs. That is why the king sought to exterminate this family to the last. A tall, dark-haired young man interrupted the conversation. He asked what the two were doing in such a strange place, and why strangers had come to this place. The girl did not know what to expect from this stranger. The young man crouched down next to the girl and carefully examined her wounded leg. He clearly smelled of tar, and Nihil prepared to attack the overly curious local at any moment. The smell seemed familiar to Adrian. She remembered that in these parts, warriors used a resin-like substance to train with cold weapons and prevent them from slipping out of their hands. That was the smell coming from the young man. Meanwhile, the stranger apologized for his sudden appearance, saying that he didn't mean to eavesdrop and had decided to introduce himself. The girl replied that his story was very interesting, but she still did not trust him. The young man quoted a sentence from the legend. It was about someone who had red wings. It was this unknown hero who was supposed to show the way to the mysterious, magical, and mythical city made entirely of pure gold. The people of Jakarta respected those with such characteristics, considering them to be real dragons, creatures who would always help the worthy and punish the wicked. This was even mentioned in the writings of Avalar. It said that all the peoples who inhabited the continent descended from 3 colored grains, and from the 4th, red grain, the king himself appeared, who gave people the ability to use fire. Many considered him a harbinger of the god Afila himself. That is why the legend of the Golden City was buried along with the stories of the ancient royal family of Jakarta. After all, the Virals were considered their descendants. The boy smiled but continued his story. It was for this reason that the temple servants broke the wings of all the statues depicting ancient kings and winged people in general. The influence of the myth was not to kill religion. The girl asked if they didn't know that every person with such defects was taken to a cellar and hidden from the eyes of ordinary people, so as not to cause general panic and curiosity, which could lead to revolution. The young man asked if the kingdom did not know about this story and did not remember how the winged princess was kidnapped in an attempt to revive the royal family under the auspices of Acelia herself and gain control. Adrian asked who the boy was and how he knew so much about the history of his native land. He replied that he was the heir to the throne. The girl was surprised by such a reception from a high-ranking person. The young man replied that the protracted war and the long-standing conflict between the people of Jakarta had led to the death of many prominent people in the state, so he considered himself worthy of meeting the future regent of his state. Adrian Du guessed that she was standing before Celestian Lu himself. He did not give the impression of a man accustomed to luxury and weak in spirit. In fact, for some reason, she felt very sorry for this boy. The prince told her a story about how Princess Ayla once went to the mountains and accidentally met a boy from Acela. They fell in love, and a child was born. The father said he had to visit his homeland, but he mysteriously disappeared. Viral believed that someone from the lands of Acela had deceived them. The princess was unable to inherit the throne because of her relationship, and was left alone with her child, abandoned and forgotten by all. The throne passed to her distant relative, Parutuskalu. He returned to the capital and began to rule successfully. After that, a line of rulers began who were supposed to belong to the Viral clan. But Parutuskalu fell in love with Isla. As a result, Princess Elmira was born, who inherited the throne and power as well as red wings. However, Celeste did not have such wings. Celeste was half-blooded with Acel and was persecuted. Meanwhile, the girl flew around the royal palace on her tiny wings. Looking at her, the entire population remembered the story of the Golden City. No one doubted that the princess would bring prosperity to the city. Everyone around her simply adored her. But when the capital surrendered to the enemy, the king demanded that the princess be given to him as a concubine. Moreover, she had not yet undergone the ceremony of succession to the throne. King Estella asked if there was no other candidate for the role of ruler. The princess was to live in Acela for 5 years and only then return to her homeland. That is how Celeste began to rule Jakarta. From the very beginning, The king planned to marry Adrian to this guy, but then he thought that this could cause a lot of trouble. So he sent her to the deputy regent from the Terebero family. The girl from the Jew family was the most suitable candidate for this, but she was also surprised that the young man behaved so confidently with her. He had no guards, although he did not give the impression of an experienced fighter. They were now traveling on elephant back. The girl was amazed that this animal, which had proven itself on the battlefield with its cruelty and ferocity, was now simply serving as a mount. She told the young man that she had seen elephants 4 years ago when she was fighting against the warriors of Jakarta. He asked her if she had served on the snow-white plains. Adrian replied that she had been there, but she also managed to take part in the war with Jakarta, as this conflict had been going on for about 20 years. Only 3 years ago, the king decided to seize the capital of the state, but tensions were still high. The mighty warriors of the state of Asela were frightened by Jakarta's ability to use weapons, some of which contained black water that caused enormous destruction. Adrian talked about her successes in this war. The young man noticed that these memories did not bring her pleasure. He said that an elephant is a powerful creature, but it often does what its driver wants, who punishes disobedience very severely, especially during training. Their conversation turned to how long the girl had been on the battlefield. She replied that an experienced soldier tries to spend as little time there as possible and win quickly. So now she was resting and enjoying herself. A beautiful landscape appeared before the travelers. Adrian realized that Jakarta was indeed a country of eternal summer. The landscapes were stunningly picturesque. Suddenly, she noticed that her companion's eyes were blue. Adrian became curious about what life was like for him among the viral tribe, whose people always had black eyes. For a moment, she felt very sorry for him. But the fact that he had survived in such conditions was a testament to his strength of spirit. Servants were already waiting for them in the palace. They treated Adrian like a god. The girl thought that such a reception was too much for her. She did not expect that an enemy could be treated in this way. The young man explained that very little time had passed since the conquest of Jakarta. Certain areas and regions were still trying to resist the invader and occupier, so Adrian had to get used to the ambiguity. In addition, there were rumors that the regent from the Terebero family had offended many local people with his actions, so nothing better could be expected or hoped for. So they had to get used to the new regent. Adrian asked if rumors had reached this area that she was a criminal. The young man replied that many had spoken about it, but no one could or wanted to treat her that way. The girl said that there was no need to flatter her too much. The young man replied that Adrian's servant was very lucky and that she should not worry about the angry and pompous lady from the progressive capital. Finally, Celestin asked the girl how old she was. She decided to joke and said that she was 17. It was time to become a real lady and think about her first love. The young man pretended to believe her. He replied that he was investigating a person who was supposed to arrive in his country and take up a fairly high position. Adrian asked what had prompted such an interest in her. The answer was unexpected, as the young man assured her that she reminded him of someone, but the age didn't match. Adrian asked if the boy really believed that there was someone else as unique and beautiful as her. After a long journey, Adrian finally got the chance to see the palaces of the capital. She was very surprised by the order in the capital of Jakarta. The girl asked her companion if everyone was busy overthrowing the viral dynasty. He replied that no one could take the throne just by killing the ruler, because all contenders had to go through a coronation ceremony. The young man then ordered the maid to give them a history lesson. He added that Adrian should ask the maid if she had any questions about anything that was unclear or seemed strange. This girl was not just anyone. She came from a royal family. This concluded their conversation. Adrian, out of habit, extended his hand in farewell. This gesture was incomprehensible to Celestial Lu. He replied that it was not customary to hold hands in Jakarta. Celestial approached the girl, took her hand, and bowed low. He added that such a gesture was used only by women and men who were connected by something more than friendship, so it was worth getting used to the customs. But the young man had encountered a girl who liked to make fun of people, and even now Aliran simply asked if that meant he was in love with her. Sometimes her jokes went too far and were too much. The young man looked at her in surprise, and the regent asked if those were his own words. She simply repeated them and rephrased them. After all, his words did not match his actions. He probably did not expect that. The appearance of the girl who was supposed to be the regent's deputy could have been misleading. She came to the palace as an ordinary knight, limping and not looking very serious, so people could joke about her. Adrian said that she could not be treated this way, because she had spent most of her life on the battlefield, amid fierce battles and carnage, where death breathed right into her face, and everything was very serious. She thought to herself that perhaps this was the king's plan. He had sent her to these lands so that she would charm the ruler with her beauty and marry him, and then the three of them would return to the capital. Suddenly, she saw that Celestial's face had changed. She asked him to forgive her for being so rude to him. She added that he shouldn't hide his surprise and try to act quiet. The young man, in turn, asked her to forgive him because he tried not to behave properly with such an important state person. He just wanted to tell her more about the customs of Yokata and these lands. The girl replied that she also wanted to flirt and relax after visiting these lands, but she couldn't allow herself to behave in such a way, so now she wanted to rest and be alone. When Adrian was left alone, he couldn't get this incident out of his head. After all, Celestial didn't do it for no reason. He did not seem like someone who would do something without thinking about the consequences. Later, a servant came to her. The girl asked her to be quiet and not disturb her mistress while she was getting dressed. After all, the ceremonial clothing of these lands was too complicated and had a lot of knots and all sorts of complications. Adrian asked who had lived in this palace before her arrival. The maid did not want to answer right away, but when the girl began to threaten her, she was forced to respond. Before that, Celeste had lived here. Now he was the heir to the throne, but in the past, he did not want to draw attention to himself. Celeste's position was strange. He had inherited the blood of a traitor from a cellar, but his mother was a princess. He had no wings and was not an heir in the full sense of the word. It seemed that even now he was not fully formed and had not decided on his position in life. However, he made a pleasant impression. Adrian thought about how, for some reason, she really liked this boy, and he didn't seem like someone who was used to living alone, a loner. However, the girl tried to push such thoughts away. Then the servant tells her that Celeste hasn't used this palace for a long time. Even the lake where he used to swim has turned into a swamp. Adrian asks if Teteboro used the palace. The girl says that he was not even allowed to be here, so now the regent lives in a separate palace, built especially for his needs. Before the conquest, only the prince and princess lived here. The girl even felt sorry for the young man. After all, he had to live in conditions of constant suspicion and constant risk. The maid said that he often left the palace complex and stayed away for a long time. Adrian asked how close her maid was to the former princess. The girl said with regret that she had been a loyal friend to Elmira. The girl found this strange and inappropriate. The regent was pleased with her attitude. The girl tried to help her and cheer her up, so she praised the maid and said that she had a special gift for making suggestions. Suddenly, she remembered Neville. The maid understood what her mistress was thinking. She asked Adrian how she should address the man who had arrived with her. The girl did not think long and replied that he was her younger brother, whom she loved. The maid asked if he was also from the Dew family, but the warrior replied that she had met him on the battlefield and that his loyalty had impressed her. So the girl named him her younger brother and loyal comrade. She jokingly added that if she had a real brother like him, her younger brother would simply lose his mind with jealousy and feelings of inferiority. So it was important to treat Neville accordingly and help him. The regent was taking a bath when the maid reported that a meeting with Lord Tereboro was planned. The girl thought about the man she was about to meet, who would not want to give up his position. Adrian knew the details of his past life. In his homeland, his father and 4 terrible brothers overshadowed the poor Tereboro, so he preferred lands far from the possessions of his father and brothers. But the young man had learned to maneuver among political intrigues and simple human malice. If he behaved in Jokart as if he owned it, an order would have already arrived from the capital to deal with him and punish him. At this point, the girl decided to stop thinking about it. As much as she didn't want to, she had to go to her meeting with the former chancellor. She was surprised that the regent hadn't asked about her or come to meet her. Most likely he was really upset that they had decided to replace him. Before the meeting, she wanted to take a walk around the swamp. The maid could not refuse this strange request from her mistress. Despite all the persuasion, the girl went to the swamp, even though the servants asked her not to. At this time, the prince was playing with his pet. The animal was one of those who had survived the mass killings. After Asella's capture, torture and interrogations rained down on all the servants who had been in the ruler's estate for a long time. The Assyrians turned out to be much more cruel warriors than the indigenous inhabitants of Jakarta themselves. But this could also be explained. Celeste himself thought that when the life of a people depended on their militancy, any people had to be cruel for the sake of their future and pass this on to their children. Maya came to visit the boy. She was the princess of Jakarta and asked Celeste what he thought of the girl who was to become regent. She was curious because there were various rumors about her. The princess was most interested in whether it was true that the girl had organized a battle between the Jokarts themselves on the battlefield, as a result of which many fellow warriors were forced to fight each other on a whim. Celeste asked her where she had gotten this information. The girl immediately replied that the maids were whispering about it. But now she was interested in whether her brother planned to marry this girl, as had been planned earlier. Maya began to tease him about his first love. It was funny and strange at the same time. After all, the boy had seen his first love in a dream. She was already a grown woman, and the boy fell in love with her immediately. The young man decided to change the subject. He asked what they were going to do with the old regent. The princess couldn't understand what her brother was getting at. The girl replied that it was up to him to decide, as king. Celeste replied that he had not yet been crowned. The girl replied that even without the ceremony, everyone considered him the rightful king, Celeste Lu. Therefore, the responsibility for the decision now lay solely with him. The girl added that, as the king of Jakarta, he now needed to learn how to make decisions. She would help him with this, even though she knew nothing about local affairs. This would stimulate his thinking. The young man replied that he was frightened by the prospect of making the wrong decision, which could lead to the downfall of the entire clan. Maya replied that this was the nature of fate and providence. Everything was in the hands of King Celeste. The girl emphasized that her brother needed to think about doing everything on his own. That way, she would be freed from many responsibilities and could freely marry the man she loved. Maya asked what her brother had decided to do with the regent. He replied that he had no intention of getting rid of Tereboro, as he was supposed to help him get married or get closer to the new regent. His sister replied that she would never allow that to happen. She was against the former regent organizing such an important event. The young man said that this was what he wanted most in the world. She reminded him of the girl from his dream. He called her a princess and was sure of it. Maya was sure that the girl had definitely captured her brother's heart, as he had never said anything like that before. Celeste remembered, however, how the messenger had arrived much earlier than the guest from Acela. He had then begun to gather information about the girl who was soon to take her place beside him, and with whom they would be spending a lot of time. The prince was worried that this girl would be put in his place, and then she would take over all of Jakarta and bring it under the control of a powerful neighbor. However, upon learning of her status, the young man was surprised. He felt terrible that danger was approaching the state of his ancestors. Regent Tereboro had caused Jakarta a lot of grief. The prince's uncle had been wrong to get involved with that man. He hoped that the current regent, who would soon arrive, would only concern himself with satisfying his own needs and would not show any ambition in matters of state or subjugation. It was futile to hope for that. When he first saw that woman, he did not see the kindness and mercy he wanted to see in her eyes. She was very different from the girl he had seen in his dream years ago. Now he was convinced that she was not the princess who had saved him from slaughter 10 years ago. These were not the warm eyes of a woman who seemed so tall because of the age difference. Back then, she had demonstrated strength. And now, the age difference was not right. She was a good 10 years older than that woman. His sister asked if she might be a relative or a close acquaintance. So the girl did not think about future prospects. The young man emphasized that they would most likely never find out the truth. After all, the girl was an adopted child of the Jew family. The chances of finding her real family were close to zero and were unfounded. Maya said that it was worth abandoning the common view that the Assyrians were their enemies. They had to abandon this view and understand that they would have to coexist with them. Times were changing, and clinging to old dogmas would be the wrong decision in their case. The life of an entire country depended on it, and if they were submissive, there was a chance that they would eventually gain freedom. Palanquin arrived at the palace from which Adrian was to depart for Lord Tereboro. The girl refused to travel in this manner, as she was not accustomed to using people as a means of transportation. She also emphasized that she did not want to harm someone else's health in order to save her own. Nikhil supported his mistress and said he would go with her. He would support her because of her injured leg. But the warrior insisted that her companion travel in the palanquin, as she did not want to cause anyone trouble or inconvenience. The man replied that his father had taught him to take care of his knees from a young age. Celis Lu arrived. He wanted to keep the girl company and learn more about her. The meeting was the perfect opportunity to do so. Adrian had no intention of refusing his company and going alone. The new regent turned to her comrade-in-arms and said she had an order for him. It was an order to rest for 10 days and do nothing but leisure activities. After that, she skillfully mounted the horse on which the prince had arrived. She asked if he was going to ride too. He replied that it was not proper for two people to ride on one horse. Besides, she had to be behind him. So it was decided that the young man would walk alongside the horse and control it in every way, for the steeds were known for their temper and character, and could try to rear up and disobey at any moment. For some reason, he thought about how many residents of Jokart considered his ancestors to be one of their own people, and how they had once prepared together to fight against their common enemy, the kingdom of Asilia. These two peoples were united by the fact that they did not pass power down through inheritance, and the ruler's castle was located right next to the homes of ordinary residents. Therefore, they did not feel oppressed, and their fighting spirit was very high. A young man was riding alongside Adrian. She could not believe that so many people ignored him and treated him so badly. He gave the impression of a ruler who was laughed at and mocked by his subjects. But it was not worth mentioning this to him. After all, he could order her to be punished at any moment. Adrian's orders regarding her companion seemed strange to her. After all, orders were given differently in Jokart. Now she wondered how she should address the young man, because even in her own country she was considered rude and ill-mannered. She didn't want Terriero to think badly of her, so she decided to speak formally. The boy said he was very surprised by her honesty. How did she manage to survive in her homeland for such things? After all, sometimes even in Jokart, such things could be punished by beheading or hanging. Celeste emphasized that they should be as open as possible with each other during the conversation, so he was not against speaking freely and not being afraid of serious and painful expressions directed at him. For some reason, the girl felt sorry for him. She said that the poor boy had learned the pain of this world very early and understood the basic principles that ruled it. Adrian asked if she could call him her little brother. The boy said that she had a good sense of humor, to which the girl replied that 20 years of living with her brother Keeley had taught her many things, including how to joke in a way that would not offend or hurt people. For some reason, the young man began to ask her about her relationship with her previous brother. She replied that she was hoping for a brother like Celeste, because her previous brother was a scoundrel and a low life. Lord Terebro met them in his room on the balcony. He was lying on a couch and looking down at the girl. He liked her, but he started the conversation by calling her by her former nickname and humiliating her. The man continued to insult her, and she did not know how to respond. Remembering the rules of etiquette, Adrian blurted out that meeting Tereboro's younger son was a rare stroke of luck in this place. The girl asked how the lord was feeling. He replied that state affairs had greatly undermined his well-being, and that was why his deputy had been sent here, and she would become his deputy. But she shouldn't expect much. The man also added that she should behave accordingly. After all, in these parts it was customary to listen to men and obey them in all circumstances. So Adrian Dew had to forget the rules of her homeland. The girl did not dare to say anything rude in response, because the Tereboro family was one of those considered to be on a par with the Dew family. The rift between these families had arisen quite recently, since the time of Barba Dew. The Terebro family, which had 5 children in total, had 5 sons and 2 daughters. None of these children could boast of dignity and aristocracy. There were only 2 Jews, but they turned out well. The current lord's dislike could be explained by the fact that he was about the same age as the girl, and he was constantly compared to her, even in the presence of strangers or guests, and the boy often lost. But the man suddenly said that he was confident in the girl and that she would cope with the duties entrusted to her. She replied that she did not claim power and was simply following the instructions of the king and the nobles. The lord asked if the girl had had time to look around. He would have been happy to show her around, but he had fallen ill and could not leave his room. Adrian assured him that they had plenty of time and that he should take care of himself. But Adrian decided that it was time to stop these games. She informed him that she had come for the regent's seal. From that day on, she would put it on all documents from Asella and Jakarta to certify the union. In addition, the seal contained part of the blessing of the temple ministers, so it had a small magical value, and she hid its contents from prying eyes. And the Lord should take care of his own condition. In addition, exactly 2 days after this day, he would go to Asella to attend to state affairs there. If he was allowed to, of course, added the girl with a smile that did not bode well, but the Lord was not going to give up so easily. He asked the prince if he had found out anything about the snake Bivan al-Muraka. The young man told him about the enormous size of this beast, and that it would take many warriors to catch it. Terebro ordered the snake to be caught for him. However, the prince replied that many people had already been killed while tracking it down, so it was a very dangerous undertaking and should be considered carefully. The snake was interesting because there was a local legend about someone who would cut off its tail. That person would immediately be cured of all possible diseases and live a long and happy life. So catching it was a priority. Adrian asked if she didn't have to go out and hunt this strange magical beast herself. The Lord assured her that she had no sense of humor and not a shred of kindness or compassion. The man also emphasized that his illness had long since removed him from public affairs, and therefore he could not immediately hand over his duties and seal. In his position, his weakness should be forgiven. The prince added that stories about snakes and their tails being cut off often turn out to be just fairy tales or lies. No warrior had yet proven his case. Adrian said it would be better to consult a doctor from Asala, but the Lord was convinced that the story was true and insisted that the snake's tail be brought to him. This was supposed to solve all his problems and make things easier for Lady Jew in her difficult situation. Celeste looked at the girl and realized how much she disliked him. After all, her expression and eyes could not lie. Adrian was not friendly toward this man and had no intention of helping him with his whims. The girl suddenly remembered her father's words and the place he had recommended she visit. It was about the very place where this huge snake was supposed to live. Fate itself could be guiding the girl on the right path. Adrian said that she had to cope with this task despite her serious injury. On the snow-white plains, she had dealt with creatures much larger than a snake, and she would be happy to help the Lord. Tiborno said that although their families had become enemies, he felt some sympathy for the girl who had been sent to such a place. The punishment was too harsh for her, an outstanding defender. But the girl struck a treacherous blow. She asked how Lord Tiborno dared to treat a girl in such a way. But what frightened her most was that he dared to speak in such a manner to the heir to the throne. The Lord justified himself. He was seriously frightened and began to talk about how the Assyrians considered themselves far superior to the savages of this region. Adrian advised him not to speak in such a manner. The girl added that she was sure that, although this was stated in the will of the supreme deity, God had actually endowed people with reason so that they could think through certain canons and rules of behavior for themselves. Adrian smiled and assured him that the illness must have clouded his mind, so she would not take today's conversation seriously. The Lord considered her behavior unthinkable, but the girl reassured him that when he returned to his native estate, to his father and brothers, she would be the only one representing their kingdom. So he shouldn't play games with her. Adrian asked if he wasn't concerned about her well-being, since he would soon be leaving, and how the people of Jakarta would treat her. To Adrian, this was the logic of a charlatan who didn't give a damn about anything. Like the Knight Aseli, she wanted to preserve her title and honor. concepts unknown to the Lord, who had disregarded the interests of the state for his own. It was the Lord's fault that all the troubles in this region had come about. An angry Terebora replied that upon his return home he would be sure to tell everyone about the girl who had no intention of repenting and did not intend to ask the king for forgiveness for her misdeeds. They could still hear the Lord's cries after they left the estate. The girl emphasized that she had no intention of giving in to this eccentric man. She was ready to do anything to ensure that he received the punishment he deserved for his recklessness. The young man wanted to talk about the snake, which was considered a sacred animal in that region. He did not want to hunt it, because in his opinion it was something blasphemous and undesirable. According to him, the mountain where the miracle snake lived was a sacred place for all the inhabitants of Jakarta. Solemn ceremonies were held there to consecrate the rulers of Jakarta and other important events. People say that the sacred power of the entire people lives in that mountain, and no one dares to climb it. After all, none of the hunters would dare to go there to hunt. The girl assured him that there was another solution to this problem. The young man asked her in surprise what she meant. Adrian had not yet fully thought through what she was going to say, but she looked conspiratorially. It was known that Princess Della was trying to instill the teachings of Afalar in all the small states around the kingdom. This idea could be useful if they wanted to reunite the small republics around Acela. This was how they were trying to erase Jakarta's local character and reduce its population to a small group of ordinary ethnic minorities from the region. That was why Terebro was so fierce. He had to stand out in some way so that he would not be transferred to another province and demoted. In this way, he wanted to kill the sacred snake that everyone around him respected and considered almost divine. Celeste wondered why he needed to know this information. But then he realized that in this way, the enemy would deal a huge blow to the local beliefs and traditions of Jakarta, destroying part of its identity. Meanwhile, Adrian also emphasized that all his threats were just empty words, because no princess would ever dare to marry such a man or even look after him. The girl could only suspect that the Lord wanted to perform some feat before the princess to get her attention. He would propose a political marriage and return to Jakarta as a full ruler. Adrian asked about the size of Jakarta's army. The young man replied that he did not know, and forcing the army to do what it was told was no easy task. After all, Jakarta's military formations operated differently. The girl assured him that without obedience, the army would turn into a pack of wild dogs. Now it was clear why such a powerful enemy had surrendered to Acela's small army. The young man was increasingly surprised by the girl's behavior. After all, she was clearly going against the interests of her countrymen and her state. The girl's eyes were not like those of the woman he had seen in his childhood. However, there was something unusual about her. She could become even more angry after his refusal to give her soldiers and an army at her disposal. Now she was trying to organize a joint expedition to the sacred land, the sacred mountain. He asked her to tell him openly what was on her mind. The girl joked again that men did not know how to speak directly about their feelings, so maybe he should confess his feelings for her. The boy felt awkward. He tried to help in every way he could, but the girl's regent constantly mocked him. He revealed information that the girl had come to their lands to conquer them once and for all and bring them under Acela's complete control and submission. He added that he had no intention of contacting Acela under any circumstances, even if the regent tried to bribe Jakarta's state with peace. Celeste would not fall for such manipulation and pretense. Adrian emphasized that she had more hidden motives regarding this state, but the boy turned out to be not as stupid as they said about him at the king's palace. His guesses were almost right. It was time to choose a form of address for Celeste. The girl began to choose from a number of formal addresses, but stopped at one. The young man did not want to give his real name, because it was a secret. A few days later, they set off for the sacred mountain. In some places, they had to make their way on animals that resembled mountain goats. The girl noticed an unpleasant smell coming from them and jokingly remarked that they had been given the honor of carrying the regent. A few days earlier, he had spoken with his sister, and she had asked him what the new regent was planning. The young man replied that he would accompany her to the sacred mountain. He did not know the reasons for the journey. The princess thought that her brother was trying to get closer to this girl, But Celeste believed that there were good reasons to be friends with the new regent, even if only to avoid angering his uncle. He was also concerned about befriending someone who had done so much on the battlefield to subjugate Yokata and her independent people. Besides, she was constantly flirting with him. These thoughts kept Celeste awake, and he woke up early and couldn't get back to sleep, tormented by anxious thoughts and unable to explain his excitement. Adrian was a mystery to him. He also remembered Elmira's words that the new regent could be her sister, who had been taken away from her since childhood. Perhaps he would be able to find some clue to this. Hope did not abandon him. Finally, they reached the place where they had to say goodbye to the animals they had grown so fond of. The girl asked the young man if he should not be in the capital right now, taking care of state affairs. He replied that as long as his sister was there was nothing to worry about. The girl asked if he was putting too much pressure on his sister with his attitude. The young man praised Elmira for her support and efforts. The young man in turn asked if her injury was preventing her from traveling. Adrian replied that it hurt a lot. This surprised the prince. She replied that she had promised to always be honest with him. Finally, even the girl could not stand it anymore. She asked how long it would take to get to the mountain where the snake lived. Celeste replied that the road was still long and that they should persevere. He also added that they could rest. The locals who gathered herbs in those places knew well that snakes usually slept during the day, but encountering one in the sunlight was a very bad omen. Sometimes it could cause a deadly illness. Once, a man went to gather firewood and encountered a snake on his way. The poor man was so frightened by the mythical creature that he dared to throw an axe at it. The animal was also frightened and ran away, leaving a piece of its tail behind. They were already approaching the village, and the story was coming to an end. The young man said that the locals decided to fry the piece of tail and eat it. After that, according to legend, everyone was cured of their illness. The uncle met Celeste and asked what the regent was doing there. When he found out the reason, he was delighted. After all, there was now a chance to catch that snake and make the area safer for people. Adrian looked in surprise at the young man, who had changed in the conditions of this village. After all, he was talking to her uncle and seemed natural. There was something pleasant about his appearance. Now the men were discussing important matters. Later, they met at the table and discussed a plan of action. The regent and her assistant were also present. It turned out that Delpho's uncle knew exactly where the animal lived. The girl was curious why everyone was talking about the miraculous powers of the snake's tail. The old man replied that it was because of a boy named Kuko. He was the one who cut off the tail, after which his father got back on his feet and recovered. But that was not the end of the story. After 3 days, the man who had recovered even stopped breathing. Many believed that he had finally died. His son began to blame himself, but a week later he got back on his feet. Eventually, they came to the conclusion that the tail was not a universal remedy. It should be used with caution, but Adrian thought that, whatever the case, she would deliver the tail to Teraboro. That way, she would prove herself. All suspicions about her true plans for the future would be dispelled. The girl's servant approached and reported that, in his opinion, the man had not lied or tried to deceive or cheat her. Finally, it was time to go to the snake's lair. Many of the locals wanted to go there to become famous warriors and legends of the village, but only Adrian and Celeste Lu himself set out on the journey. On the way, the girl asked about the boy's grandmother. He tried in every way to avoid questions of this nature. In the end, she gave up on him, wanting to just finish the job before sunset. The girl encountered a monster for the first time on the snow-white plains, where the creature quietly crept up on the warrior. There were no monsters in the kingdom, as it was protected by divine power. Adrian told her about her first monster. In her opinion, it resembled a caterpillar for some reason. It was larger than 2 healthy men, and poison flew out of its mouth, striking its enemies. The girl said that for her, real monsters were animals or creatures that posed a threat to people. According to her information, the water snake was dangerous and could harm the local villagers. Uncle Deva reminded her that the snake had been very fast from the beginning, and it was even difficult to see it. But soon it grew larger and moved mostly in a straight line, paying no attention to other creatures. The girl said that last time, Nikhil had saved her from the monster by arriving just in time. But she didn't want to remember that episode because all the slaves who had sided with Adrian at that time had been sent even further away. The king could not forgive the girl for her courage in giving people what they wanted most: freedom. After that, they should have hated her. However, it was Adrian who saved them from the terrible monster. The young man was impressed by how calmly she spoke about the monsters and the various dangers that awaited her on her journey. Meanwhile, the girl explained that the monsters retained the habits of their animal ancestors. Adrian, meanwhile, thought about how it must feel to be a boy who had been given a little time before the ceremony but had failed to do it. He was called a king without a crown and was often ridiculed. The young man's endurance was enviable. She became curious about what the ceremony was like. Celeste asked what exactly interested the girl. She replied that he could choose what bothered him. He said that he personally had not undergone the ceremony. To which the regent replied that he should not behave like an offended teenager because of this. He asked if Jocata's throne was really just a child's toy to her. The young man explained that the tradition of initiation into kingship was based on the Veral people's belief in the seasons. They believed that there was only heat or excessively long rains. Therefore, they first bowed to fire. The ceremony was a meeting with a bird of fire. Whoever was lucky enough to meet the firebird in the first 6 days of rain became the monarch and assumed all power among the people. It turns out that the bird chooses for itself. The young man thought that Adrian was laughing at his words, but the girl quickly assured him that she respected local traditions. Celeste replied that spiritual beings were of great importance in the lives of the people of Viral. Although the water snake they were going to fight did not belong to such creatures. Usually, animals did not interfere in the lives of ordinary people, so you can safely go hunting for this beast. Nothing will happen. Since the territory inhabited by the Viral belonged to many tribes, local beliefs were closely intertwined. They shared their culture and strictly adhered to traditions and customs. This was also the reason for the quick surrender of local tribes to their enemies. But the appearance of the monster interrupted their conversation. The snake was right in front of them. It was writhing in huge coils and slithering away. The girl watched the animal closely from behind a tree. The young man continued to explain that the sudden appearance of a snake was considered a bad omen among the locals. It portended misfortune and disease. However, Adrian feverishly assessed the chances of defeating such a huge opponent. For some reason, it seemed to her that the prince was not going to fight the monster. But the girl knight prepared her weapon anyway. Realizing that she would have to fight alone, Adrian quickly thrust her sword into the snake's eye. It began to writhe and roar, spraying blood everywhere. The girl was about to deliver the decisive blow, but the regent was surprised by the beast's behavior. Its behavior, especially after being wounded, was very similar to that of a person who had been seriously injured in battle against a numerically superior enemy. Despite everything, Adrian decided to face her enemy in direct combat. She was not going to surrender to a giant snake, for she had defeated many more powerful and formidable enemies and their kings in numerous battles. She was not going to run away either, for with her wounded leg, she would not be able to escape her pursuer. The snake attacked. Adrian thrust her sword, which pierced the upper part of the snake's mouth and came out from the outside. She already considered herself dead, as she was completely in the animal's mouth. Celeste came to her aid. He grabbed the girl tightly and pulled her out of the enemy's jaws. She did not expect this and could only be surprised, but it lasted only a moment. The next second, she attacked the snake, killing it with her sword between its scales. Adrian tried to hold on to the reptile, which was trying to shake off its deadly enemy. The heroine woke up in a large earthen palace. The sun had already risen, but everything around was bathed in a golden glow. But the first thought that came to her was that she had weakened since the last battle. Her muscles had clearly become weak, because after the battle on the plains, she had been locked up in prison, and then sent on a journey through a hot region, which had also exhausted her. So it was no surprise. For some reason, she also remembered how Celeste had grabbed her hand. The strength of his grip was tremendous. She had no idea that the young man had such strength. She was even more surprised by his agility and how tightly he held her. Although, in fact, she was even more surprised when she saw the expression on the prince's face. It seemed that he himself did not expect such agility and quick reactions from himself. Celeste was becoming an increasingly mysterious person to her. Tired from the battle, the girl thought that Terebro had been right after all. The expedition to fight the monster had been a rash move and an unjustified risk that could have ended tragically. Nikiel approached her. He told her that everyone was concerned about what had happened and that 2 days had passed since the battle with the snake. Adrian was once again surprised by her faithful servant's economy of words. The servant also said that after so many days spent in bed, he had to give the girl a massage to get her blood flowing. She replied that this was too much, and that soon he would even have to feed her with a spoon. The young man reported that after the battle, the girl had lost consciousness, and he had been forced to evacuate her from the battlefield immediately afterwards. Adrian asked if the prince had not helped him. Nikhil replied that Celeste had tried to do so, but the servant had refused. Adrian said that he shouldn't have done that. After all, she hadn't really recovered yet, and Nikhil had suffered more. The servant thought about how his mistress had always been like that. Other people's wounds caused her more trouble than her own injuries. But the girl was not going to calm down. She asked him not to do that again. Adrian asked what had happened to the regent. Nihil replied that the effect had not yet taken hold. Perhaps it would take more than 2 days for a full recovery. She admitted that she would be happy to make the lord a eunuch. The girl replied that it wasn't just a whim. In that case, he wouldn't be able to get into the princess's bed, and she wouldn't be forced to marry him. Nihil relaxed after that. After the conversation and breakfast prepared by the servant, the court physician visited the girl. He examined her thoroughly, although she said she was just overtired and that there was nothing to worry about. The doctor said that he guessed her true thoughts and doubts. The maid who came to help said that in the doctor's homeland, many people were also shamans who could read minds. The doctor said that the energy of the knight's body had long since been depleted, and she was spending the remnants of her former power. So it was worth thinking about this and drawing the appropriate conclusions to change her life. The man explained that people usually develop their energy center spiritually, but the Knights of Aseli train their bodies more and forget about the spirit. The body expends energy, but does not replenish it accordingly. The girl believed the doctor's words, but said that any charlatan would say the same thing. So there was no need to boast. The man was already leaving. And as he said goodbye, he said that the real reason was psychosomatic. Adrian decided to spend some time in bed and rest. She was no longer going to risk her life, but simply hold out for the necessary period and return to her homeland. One of the local cult servants asked the prince if he had really dared to take the witch from a cellar directly to the sacred place. He would have to pay for such an act. Celeste replied that only the first part was true. But in reality, the girl was not a witch, but a regent who could greatly help Yokata in resolving the issue of his continued existence.